Why are mannequins so creepy? They're unsettling past mannequins. They stand silently in shop windows, dressed in the latest fashions, staring with blank expressions at the streets outside. Most people pass by without thinking twice, but if you pause for just a second, a strange unease creeps in. Their human-like forms are close enough to us to feel familiar, yet not real enough to be comforting. It's that eerie feeling that makes some people shiver. Some look away, and others whisper, "Why are mannequins so creepy?" But here's the truth. The unsettling nature of mannequins isn't an accident. It's the result of centuries of evolution in design, cultural shifts, and deep psychological triggers buried in the human mind. The story begins in ancient history, long before glossy shop windows and department stores.
Wow.
Early mannequins were not made of fiberglass or plastic, but of wood, stone, and clay. In ancient Egypt, artisans used miniature figures to model clothing and jewelry for the wealthy. These figures weren't meant to be lifelike. They were tools, objects of measurement and demonstration. Yet even in their crude form, they carried an aura of humanity. A doll-sized figure dressed in finery became more than wood or clay. It became a ghostly reflection of the human body itself. Fast forward to the Renaissance, and we see mannequins evolve into lay figures. Artists used these wooden jointed bodies to perfect their paintings of draped fabrics and human poses. Some were so detailed with articulated limbs and realistic proportions that they seemed alive. But here is where the creepiness begins. People in the 16th and 17th centuries were unsettled by them too. There are records of artists covering their lay figures at night. Because the lifeless stare and frozen pose were too disturbing in the dim candlelight of their studios. Imagine waking at midnight to see a figure seated in the corner, looking almost alive but not moving. It's easy to see how the uncanny began to take root. By the 19th century, mannequins moved from the artist's studio to the world of commerce. Department stores were booming, fashion was becoming an industry, and retailers needed a way to show off the latest designs. Enter the shop mannequin. The first commercial mannequins were made of waxy material that could mimic skin tones and subtle features far more convincingly than wood. Wax mannequins looked eerily human, with glass eyes, real hair, and even painted veins. Some were posed in dramatic scenes, entire families frozen mid-dinner, or couples depicted in lifelike conversations, all for the purpose of selling clothes. Crowds flocked to see these displays, but not everyone was enchanted. Wax figures had a habit of melting in summer heat, warping into grotesque shapes. Imagine walking past a store window and seeing a mannequin with a face half collapsed, one eye drooping, the smile twisted into something nightmarish. It was unsettling, and newspapers of the time often described them as too real for comfort. The creepiness deepened in the early 20th century. As mannequin-making techniques advanced, so did their realism. Stores competed to have the most striking, lifelike displays. In some cities, mannequins became attractions in their own right. Yet, with every detail added perfectly sculpted cheekbones, glassy eyes that seemed to follow you, hairstyled like film stars, the uncanny grew stronger. Psychologists later gave this phenomenon a name: the uncanny valley. It describes that uneasy feeling we get when something looks human, but not quite human enough. It's real to be a toy. It's a fake to be a person. Mannequins sit directly in that valley, triggering instincts that make us shudder. During World War II, mannequins took an even darker turn. With resources scarce, some stores resorted to reusing old wax models, many of which had deteriorated. Their cracked faces, chipped paint, and faded hair made them look ghostly. Others experimented with papier, chur, and plastics, which, instead of making them more human-like, often made them rigid and doll-like. Soldiers returning from war described mannequins as reminders of corpses, stiff, pale, and lifeless. In a world recovering from so much death, these figures struck a nerve. By the mid-20th century, mannequins began to shift away from hyperrealism. Designers experimented with abstraction smooth faces with no features, elongated limbs, futuristic shapes. On the surface, this made them less creepy. But in another way, it added a new eeriness. These faceless figures looked alien, stripped of humanity, yet dressed in everyday clothes. People began to ask, who are these blank people standing silently in windows? Why do they look like us, but without identity? Psychologists suggest that mannequins creep us out because they mess with our most basic instincts for survival. Humans are wired to detect faces and recognize expressions. When we see a face, we immediately search for clues. Is this person friendly, angry, dangerous? Mannequins disrupt that system. Their faces are frozen, their eyes don't move, their expressions never change. Our brains can't read them, and that ambiguity triggers unease. It's the same reason clowns can feel creepy. The mismatch between a frozen smile and the absence of real emotion creates a psychological glitch. But it's not just psychology, it's also history. Mannequins have been used in strange, unsettling ways outside of fashion. In the 20th century, they were deployed in crash tests, bomb simulations, and military training. Photographs of mannequins after nuclear tests, charred and melted in mock towns, circulated widely. These images were haunting. Artificial families obliterated as stand-ins for humanity. Suddenly, mannequins weren't just about clothes. They were about death, destruction, and fragility. Those images left a lasting cultural imprint, deepening the mannequin's creepy reputation. Even today, mannequins carry that unsettling energy. Advances in manufacturing have made them more realistic than ever, with sculpted muscles, intricate facial details, and even veins beneath translucent skin. Some have sensors that allow them to move slightly or react to nearby motion. Others are designed with cameras hidden in their eyes, tracking shoppers' behavior. Think about that for a second. The mannequin watching you as you watch it? The line between object and observer blurs, and the creep factor skyrockets. There's also the cultural backdrop. Movies and horror stories have leaned heavily on mannequins as symbols of unease. From Hitchcock's Psycho to countless haunted house tales, mannequins are depicted as coming alive at night, hiding spirits, or staring when no one's looking. They tap into the primal fear of being imitated, replaced, or watched. Pop culture has trained us to see mannequins not just as store props, but as something more sinister, waiting silently with secrets. And yet, despite the creepiness, mannequins are vital to modern fashion. They allow us to see clothing in context, to visualize how fabric moves and fits. Without them, retail would lose its silent models, its ever-present display of style. We may shudder when we catch their gaze, but we also rely on them to sell us the image of who we want to be. That duality, useful and unsettling, familiar and strange, is what keeps mannequins locked in the uncanny valley. Fascinating and disturbing all at once. So why are mannequins so creepy? Because they sit at the edge of humanity, a reflection of us, but never truly alive. They are born from centuries of attempts to replicate the human form. Evolving from wooden dolls to wax effigies, from faceless abstractions to hyper-realistic replicas, they embody our fascination with ourselves, but also our fear of the in-between things that look alive but aren't. In their silence, they remind us of death, of surveillance, of the uncanny. And maybe that's why every time we glance at one in a shop window, part of us wonders if it might just move when we're not looking.